Hey everyone, and welcome back to Chat Like a Native. You know, we love to get into the nitty-gritty of English, and today we're going to be looking at adjectives and, how to use them effectively to sound more like a native speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Which maybe sounds a little counterintuitive because sometimes you think more is always better.
Right.
But we'll find out why that's not always the case.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because I think we all, when we're learning a language, we want to expand our vocabulary. We want to sound, more impressive.
Right.
But, overusing adjectives is something that English learners often do and actually makes you sound less fluent.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not always about having a bigger vocabulary.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about how native speakers, prioritize clear, concise communication.
Right.
They don't want to sound too flowery or use too many words when they don't need to.
Okay, so can you give us an example of what you mean? Like, how would a native speaker use adjectives differently?
Yeah, so let's imagine you're describing a butterfly, right? An English learner might say, I saw a very beautiful, extremely large, incredibly colorful butterfly.
Right.
And it just sounds a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, I can see that.
A native speaker might just say, I saw a stunning butterfly.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Much more impactful.
Yeah, that does sound a lot better. I like that.
Right.
So it's all about choosing the right adjective, the right moment, I guess.
Yeah, and thinking about what quality you want to highlight. So are you trying to emphasize, beauty, size, color, or something else?
I see.
And once you kind of identified that key quality, then you choose the adjective that encapsulates that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So are there any hard and fast rules for using adjectives? Or is it more about a feeling?
Well, there are some guidelines.
Okay.
For example, there's a conventional order for adjectives in English.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
And although we may not even realize it, native speakers follow this order quite naturally.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so it goes like this. Quantity, quality, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, and purpose.
Wow. Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But don't worry, it becomes more natural with practice.
Right.
So, for example, you would say a small red leather bag.
Okay.
Not a leather small red bag.
Oh, yeah. The first one sounds way better.
It does, right.
Yeah.
So, there are exceptions, but generally sticking to that conventional order just sounds more natural to a native speaker's ear.
That's really interesting. I've never even thought about that before. But now that you say it, I can totally hear the difference.
Yeah, and it's these little things that can really help you sound more fluent.
Okay, so we talked about using fewer adjectives and the order that they go in, but is it ever okay to use multiple adjectives?
It is, but again, it's about choosing them carefully and avoiding redundancy.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so instead of saying the food was very tasty and incredibly delicious,
Right.
you could just say the food was exquisite.
Exquisite.
Oh, I love that. One strong adjective.
Yeah.
And it avoids the repetition and creates a more sophisticated tone.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That sounds much more natural.
It does, right? And sometimes you can even eliminate the need for adjectives altogether.
Really? How do you do that?
Well, by using strong nouns.
Oh.
For instance, instead of saying a very big, impressive building, you could simply say skyscraper.
That's true.
Right. The noun itself conveys the meaning.
So it's not always about adding more words. It's about choosing the right words, the words that already have that power built into them.
Exactly. It's about understanding those nuances and using language effectively.
This is really fascinating. I'm starting to see how much thought goes into sounding natural in English.
Yeah, and a lot of it is about being observant and paying attention to how native speakers use language.
So listening is key.
Absolutely. The more you listen to authentic English, whether it's conversations, movies, TV shows, books, the more you'll develop an intuition for what sounds natural and what sounds a bit off.
So it's like training our ears to recognize those patterns.
Exactly. And then you can start to incorporate those patterns into your own speech and writing.
This is all incredibly insightful. So to kind of sum up what we've discussed so far, it seems like mastering adjectives is not just about memorizing a long list of words, but about understanding how they function within a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Choosing the right ones for the right context.
Yeah.
And then strategically using them to create that desired effect.
Exactly. And finding that balance between precision and conciseness, between giving enough detail and keeping things elegant and simple.
I like that it's about using adjectives to enhance our language, not to overload it.
You got it. And remember, any skill, this takes practice.
Of course.
And patience. but the rewards are definitely worth it.
I totally agree. And speaking of practice, maybe we can look at some specific examples of how to use adjectives effectively in different situations.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Awesome. I'm excited to dive in.
Me too. Okay, so let's start with storytelling.
Yeah.
Like, imagine you're describing a character. So instead of just listing physical attributes like, he was a tall, muscular man with dark hair and blue eyes,
Right.
you could use adjectives that reveal something about his personality or his state of mind.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, so you could say something like, he stood with a weary slouch, his piercing blue eyes hinting at a past filled with both triumphs and regrets.
Wow, that's so much more evocative. Like those adjectives, weary and piercing,
Right.
they really create a sense of intrigue and mystery around this character. It makes me want to know more about him.
Right. And that's the power of well-chosen adjectives.
Yeah.
You can take a simple description and turn it into something much more compelling.
Absolutely. So how about using adjectives in persuasive writing?
Okay, good question.
How can we use them to make our arguments stronger?
Well, one way is to use adjectives that evoke strong emotions in the reader.
Okay.
So let's say you're writing about animal rights.
Uh-huh.
Instead of saying animal cruelty is bad, which is pretty bland,
Right.
you could say the horrific abuse inflicted on innocent animals is a stain on our humanity.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's much more powerful. The adjectives horrific and innocent, they really heighten the emotional impact of the statement.
Exactly. And that's what you want to do. You want to
Yeah.
connect with the reader on an emotional level.
It makes you feel something.
Yes. And when you do that, your arguments become more persuasive and memorable.
This is all making so much sense now. I never realized how important adjectives are for, like, influencing how people think and feel.
It's true. They're not just about adding fluff. They're tools that we can use to really shape our message.
Right. And speaking of shaping our message, can we talk about using adjectives for humor?
Of course. Humor is a great way to connect with people.
Yeah, and I feel like I've never really thought about using adjectives specifically for comedic effect.
Well, a well-placed adjective can create a hilarious image or a witty observation in the listener's mind.
Okay, so how would you do that?
So, for example, instead of saying, my friend is messy, you could say, my friend lives in a state of perpetual disarray that would make a hoarder blush. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. I can totally picture that. It's like you're painting this comical caricature with your words.
Right. You're using the adjectives to exaggerate the situation for comedic effect.
I love it. So it's not just about being accurate. It's about being creative and playful with language.
Absolutely. And sometimes the most unexpected adjective can create the biggest laugh.
That's true. So don't be afraid to experiment.
No. Have fun with it.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to the versatility of adjectives.
Good.
I used to think of them as these simple descriptive words, but there's so much more than that.
Yeah.
They can add depth, emotion, humor to our language. It's amazing.
It is. And, the journey to mastering adjectives, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
The more you pay attention to how they're used in different contexts,
Yeah.
the more nuanced and sophisticated your own language will become.
So it's all about being observant and paying attention to those subtle ways that language is being used around us.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment and play with language. I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
But, I have to admit, I sometimes get a bit intimidated when I see those long, complicated adjectives in books or articles.
I understand.
I always worry about using them incorrectly or sounding pretentious.
Well, I think it's important to remember that even native speakers don't use every adjective in the dictionary.
That's true.
The key is to focus on the words that you feel comfortable using.
Right.
And if you're ever unsure about a word, don't hesitate to look it up or ask someone.
Yeah, good point. So it's not about trying to sound like a walking dictionary.
Exactly. It's about finding your own voice.
Yeah, I like that. So to wrap up our discussion on adjectives, it seems like the key takeaways are
choosing them thoughtfully, using them strategically,
Uh-huh.
and letting them enhance your language without overwhelming it,
Yeah.
and most importantly, having fun with it.
I love that. And I think that applies to language learning in general.
Totally.
It's not about memorizing rules and striving for perfection, but about being curious, exploring, and embracing that journey of discovery.
I couldn't agree more.
That's so true. It's all about the journey and enjoying the process.
Exactly. And the more you immerse yourself in the language, the more it'll become second nature to you.
I agree. Okay, so before we wrap up today's deep dive into adjectives, I want to leave our listeners with a little challenge.
Ooh, a challenge. I like it. What is it?
Well, we've talked a lot about how using fewer adjectives can actually make our English sound stronger and more natural.
Right.
So I challenge everyone listening to go back to something you've written, or maybe even something you said recently, and try to rephrase it using fewer adjectives.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great way to put everything we've talked about into practice.
Exactly. It's like a little experiment to see if you can make your language even more impactful.
And you might be surprised at how much of a difference it makes.
I think so, too. And, if you're up for it, we'd love to hear about your adjective makeovers.
Yeah, share your before and after sentences with us on social media.
We're always so impressed by the creativity of our listeners.
Absolutely. And it's always inspiring to see how everyone is applying these tips in their own unique way.
So to all our Chadic,
Yeah.
native listeners out there, keep practicing, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep having fun with English.
Well said. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Likewise. And we'll catch you all in our next deep dive.